Hey, and we're back. Sorry about that. We had an issue. We had to do a channel refresh.
And I've never run the commercials before, so it gets kind of interesting.
Yeah, it was one of those. I had an issue. Had to fix here at the house. Had a technical issue. It just all. Hey, we.
It wouldn't be HallowCon without the technical difficulties and everything else.
Yeah, and we just crossed into 46 hours of continuous broadcasting. So, we are testing StreamYard to its limit, and I hope we can make these last 3 hours. We're going to do our best. But up next is a new guest to HallowCon. It is A.G. Carpenter. Let me bring her up. And almost caught her with a cup of coffee. I tried. Good morning, A.G.
Good morning. How are y'all?
And you are tuning in from the other side of the country, from the left coast.
Yes, at this point I am.
Yes. Well, I hope everything's going good for you out there. Your panel, I believe you said it will be on tropes.
That's correct.
The good, the bad, and bending them. I have no clue what that. I probably know what it means, but I don't catch the term tropes.
Okay. Well, that's kind of how we're going to start. Okay. My phone is a couple minutes. No, okay. My computer for some reason was not synced up with the time on my phone, and I was like, "What's going on? What time is it?" It was off by like 3 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Well, but it was 3. It was like 3 minutes, and I was like, "What's going on?"
Oh, okay.
So I just wanted to check and make sure that we were in the right place.
Let me explain how it's going to work.
Sure.
I'm going off screen. You get the screen. We'll have questions come in. Do you want to go through what you want to present first and then take questions, or take questions as they come along?
I can take questions as they come along. Okay. I have kind of some general points that I'm going to cover, but I'll also, usually when I do these in person, I kind of stop at certain points to say, hey, does anyone have any questions, comments, you want me to elaborate? So yeah. I think that should work here too.
If you want to do that, that's fine. We'll be monitoring. Of course, no inappropriate comments will come through. We will block those out, and I just let all my new authors know that we're going to cover you and all that. Is your headset plugged in? I'm getting an echo.
It is. Let me see.
We just want to get that taken care of real quick.
Yeah, and my internet has been really off and on.
Oh, we understand. It's been like I said, we're at 36 hours.
Yeah, and we share internet with the building because we're in a shelter, and also there's also been issues because just in general, everybody's virtual right now with school. Yes. So they went from having like 5,000 students a day online to having 65,000 students a day online, and everything in the city has just kind of like taking a big dump.
Yeah. Well, that's
Even
understandable.
on non-school days.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so I'm gonna toss it over to you. You have full control. We will see you. Like I said, we'll be monitoring everything. And oh, well, I'm gonna throw this up. You may know this guy, a guy named Chris Walker. Says good afternoon here and good morning
oh
there,
yes, Chris.
AG.
Hey, Chris.
All right, so I'm going to drop out, and ladies and gentlemen, AG Carpenter.
Yay. Okay, hold on. Coffee. So if you're not familiar with me, I write primarily fantasy, science fiction, and some horror. I write as A.G. Carpenter. Falstaff Books has the majority of my published work at this point, but there's also some self-published stuff. And I have a Patreon if folks are ever interested in checking that out. You can.
Well, let me make, if you would, tell us what that Patreon is, and we'll type that in real quick, and we'll scroll across the bottom, your website and Patreon.
Yeah, and I will say that my website is pretty much dead at this point because I have had, well, where'd it go? I have had so much going on that I have not been able to keep I do have an author page on Facebook. If you type in A.G. Carpenter, like author, it should show up, but there's, I think, no updates there from the past 2 years. But the Patreon gets updated at least a few times a month. I was sick this month, so I spent a couple weeks where I just wasn't doing anything.
Yes.
Hold on, I'm waiting for it to pull up. I think it's patreon.com/AGGY Carpenter, but I'm waiting for it to load and tell me for sure, because I always get a little confused about that. It's always tricky, trying to get the same name across all your platforms, so sometimes they change. But while I'm waiting for that to load, I'm just going to say, so we're talking about tropes today, and the origin of tropes. I looked up the definition because I know kind of what they are in fiction, but I figured I'd check it out. Officially, it's a figurative or metaphorical use of a word or expression or a significant or recurrent theme, which is how they're typically used in fiction. And it comes from the Latin, to turn, or the way, the road, which is important as we get on in this as to why that works. Why is this not wanting to show me what my address is here? Let me try this. Hold on. Yeah, it's patreon.com/Aggie Carpenter, and the A at the beginning of Aggie is capitalized, and so is the C at the beginning of Carpenter, which I think is important because I've tried to link it before and it gets cranky if I don't do that. All right. So when folks study genre academically, tropes are the thing that they look at to say this belongs in this genre or this other one. There's a reason why we have cozy mysteries versus thrillers. Cozy mysteries have certain elements to them, usually, the amateur detective. They tend to be small town. They start with little plots that then suddenly turn into big plots, or they're, there's a murder and the amateur detective solves it because they can relate it to something very personal and seemingly unrelated. And if you're not familiar with cozy mysteries, Miss Marple, Father Brown, even Miss Fisher, Miss Fisher's murder mysteries, which are fabulous, and the Cat Who books, which I think have kind of fallen out of favor, but used to be really popular. There's a ton of them. And they're great. They have cats in them. Siamese, I think. It's been a while since I read them. But tropes are kind of those things that when you read a book, you say, oh, That's what this is. This is this kind of a story. And in science fiction, generally, like the difference between science fiction and fantasy is you have tech versus magic, and then sometimes you get science fantasy, which is an extension where you have tech that is fueled by magic. So it's things that look so the original, not the movie version of League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, kind of falls into science fantasy a little bit because it's tech that's powered by some unknown source that may or may not actually exist in the world. They kind of hand wave it that it's, I don't know, some sort of nuclear thing, but I seem to recall that in the comic there was like a floating crystal and whatnot that made it really not not sciencey and more fantasy, plus invisible people for no particular reason and things like that. So that's what a trope is. And they're great because when you're writing in a genre, you want to know what those tropes are because they work as a shorthand for telling your readers what your story's about and kind of the mood of it, because there's a lot of variation in subgenres between, you know, dark fantasy and high fantasy and low fantasy and epic fantasy. Each of those things have similar elements and tropes, but they also have individual things that make them more one or the other. And the same with science fiction. And science fiction, I think, in general, has sort of more subgenres than fantasy. But don't quote me on that because it gets kind of blurry. Whew. Coffee, yay. But tropes help you define and find what genre you're writing in, which I write a lot of stuff that really genre bends. So there's a lot of different elements in it. I write sci-fi Western, which also has a very strong horror bent to it, which somebody the other day told me, well, like, doesn't most modern sci-fi Western have a horror bent to it? And I was like, I mean, maybe. I'm trying to think of a lot of science fiction Westerns lately. And of course, the sort of penultimate right now is Westworld, which I think kind of went in a different tack. I haven't seen any of season 3. I saw the first 2 seasons. I haven't seen any of season 3. So it felt kind of like a Western, but not in a Western setting when I watched the trailers for it. So I don't know. It may have gone completely in a different direction, but it definitely had some horror vibes, particularly kind of body horror, which is a subgenre of horror, and again depends on particular tropes. So it's important to know sort of what you're dealing with, because I've had people say like, oh, just write whatever you want. You know, if you want to write steampunk, just put whatever you want in it. That doesn't really work. Because when people see you use the term steampunk, they're going to expect certain things. And you can add to those things and you can take out a certain number of those things. But you can't just slap a genre label on any old story and say, oh, this is whatever, because you get unhappy readers. Because someone who's picking up a cozy mystery and they get something that's actually body horror is not going to be not going to be happy. If you're looking for something that's Miss Marple and you get something that's more Wes Craven, like that's going to be a reader who's very dissatisfied with you. And of course, the trick is that sometimes you pick up readers you wouldn't normally pick up, but you have to be very aware of kind of what you're doing, because chances are you're just going to annoy people if you misuse your genre labels and people come into it expecting certain elements and then they don't get those. If you want to learn more about classic tropes, because there are very defined and specific tropes as well as newer ones. We're going to talk about how that happens with trope bending in a little bit. But tvtropes.org is a massive database, and it can be a little tricky to search because if you don't know what you're looking for, it's I think they have like a not a glossary, like an index. But you can also go through and they will, there's a page where they like pop up a new trope every day, so you can just kind of browse through. But they talk about specifically not only which tropes exist kind of multiple times, making them a trope, so it's not just like an individual using a theme a particular time, but like, hey, this thing shows up more and more and more. But they also give you examples of where it shows up, and they also give you examples of where they're problematic, where they work, which is helpful if you're trying to formulate a story and not make mistakes with certain things. And we're going to talk about that in a second, but I'm going to stop for a second. I'm going to drink some coffee. If anybody has any questions about anything I've just said, if I'm talking too fast, I know the virtual thing gets a little tricky. Sometimes now's a great time to ask a question or clarification.
Yeah, I am still trying to find your Patreon page. I can't find it.
Uh-oh.
If you want to copy and paste it over into the private chat.
Yeah. Oh, wait. Hold on.
I mean, I can't even find your books on Amazon.
Uh-oh. That's not good. Let's see. Okay. Hold on. So here is paste. Ding. Okay, there's Patreon. And let me also real quick look for, because I have an Amazon page to show it to me, and then I can give you a link to it because it'll link to the thing that has the profile on Amazon.
Okay.
Da, da, da.
Okay. I just did a link test, so making sure of that.
Amazon was trying to pretend it didn't remember my password. That was fun.
Don't say it. Don't do like some people and actually say it over the air by mistake.
Oh, no. I'm not going to do that. It was just, some of the web browsers, they have a thing where you can like save the password, which I do sometimes because I use my phone as well as the laptop. I don't use the laptop a whole lot. And it was like, this is not the right one. And I was like, did I change it? Apparently I didn't. It just didn't remember. Okay. Copy that and paste that over here. All right. There we go. And that's the Amazon link there.
I'm so sorry we're messing up your.
No. Look, I find it just a teensy bit ironic that you've been trying to get me to HallowCon for how many years now, and the year that it happens that I can be like, yes, I can show up for an hour is the year that like nobody can actually show up in person. So oh my goodness. All right. Okay, so I'm not seeing any questions, so that's totally cool. Maybe I'm explaining myself better than I thought. Always awesome. So we kind of talked about what tropes are, those thematic motifs that you use that help identify which genre or subgenre you're in and how they help you satisfy your readers or dissatisfy them. Sometimes you can surprise them a little, like that's not always a bad thing. That's kind of where we get into genre bending, which we're going to talk about in a minute. but knowing what they are. And this is kind of one of those things where reading a lot, every now and then I run into authors who kind of, they don't want to read in the genre that they're preparing to write because they're afraid that it's going to be derivative, which there's kind of a point there, but you also have to be really careful about that, because if you're not familiar with the genre that you're writing, especially if it's a subgenre, so they get really narrow. And if you want to kind of look into like kind of how narrow and specific things can get, you can always look at the sort of misaligned punk genres, because there's a ton of them. But there's differences between steampunk and gas punk and diesel punk and hard punk and cyberpunk. Like there's a bunch. So, and each of those categories, part of it has to do with the tech that's present in those. Part of it has to do with the types of characters that you see. And that's the thing about tropes, is some of them have to do with sort of plot elements and some of them have to do with character elements. And it's easiest to kind of bend character elements rather than plot elements, because once you start to bend plot elements, it gets a little like Enola Holmes. Like if Enola Holmes had stayed with a single plot of trying to find her mother, that turns out to be not really a mystery. So if that were the main mystery, that wouldn't work, because it turns out to be not a mystery. You're not dealing with, an investigation anymore, because it turns out that she's not been kidnapped, she's left on her own, etc. Spoilers, sorry. It's been out for a while. I figure everyone's seen it who's wanted to see it or has heard it about it, who's wanted to hear about
And
it.
that is actually a good series, I got to add.
Oh, yeah, and I've not read the books. I've only seen the little film on Netflix with Millie Bobby Brown, but it was amazing. I was really surprised. I'm really surprised.
And she actually has said that she wants to complete the series.
Oh, great. I'm so excited.
And Chris Walker did throw in a comment. He goes, live TV and streaming. Isn't it fun trying to avoid the gremlins? Oh, Chris, me and you going to talk. And Carly Carleen says, yes, Siamese in the Cat Who books. She has the entire collection. So,
yeah, I had somebody gave me the first 4 in the series when I was in my early teens, which I'm trying to remember who gave me those books, because they're not. I mean, I read Dick Francis when I was in my early teens too. It's funny. I have such a love for reading mysteries. I'm terrible at writing them. They have a puzzle aspect to them that I tend to not do very well with. But I read a lot of Dick Francis, and Dick Francis is in a lot of ways more explicit than the Cat Who books. But I believe it's like the first or the second of the Cat Who books that like they discover that someone got like incinerated in the pottery kiln. And I'm like, who gave these to me? Because that's a little intense. For someone who was 13, but they were great. They're great books, and they are definitely cozy mysteries, and they have a cat, and there are a bunch of them. So if you like them, it's a great series to get into, because there are a lot. I think I only read about the first 5 or 6, and then the library didn't have any more, because we were in a small town, so getting more of them was sometimes kind of tricky. But they're great, and they really, if you like cats and you like mysteries, and they're fun, and they've kind of got that early sort of not quite paranormal romance, but sort of that edge of like where other genres started to kind of bring more kind of the romance element in on top of everything else, instead of just having, romance, capital R. So they're great. I love them. Dick Francis is great too. I read a research.
Actually, we got a big question here from Spooky
Sure.
Dude Podcast. With social media platform algorithms forming a barrier between you and your audience, what are some ways you found to get your content more exposure and reach a wider audience?
Okay, so probably the most effective thing that I found is doing the themed Twitter chats, which I think are still a thing. My personal life has been really crazy, so I've not been on social media a whole lot for the past 18 months, but I was doing a lot of Twitter prior to that. And I participated in Creature Chat, and these are all hashtagged, but hashtag Creature Chat. Trying to remember, there's several. I did one for a while that met like every other weekend. We'd meet on a Friday, and then like 2 weeks later, we'd meet on a Saturday. That was a virtual bar con for folks, because I wasn't able to attend a lot of conventions. Well, I haven't been able to attend a lot of conventions due to finances, but you know, you always see people talking on Twitter about like, oh, I'm at Dragon Con, or I'm at such and such con. And a lot of people, even if they go to some cons, they can't go to all of them. And it can be kind of frustrating because you're not there with your people. So I was like, we should just have a virtual con, and we'll just bar con. And so we'd have a theme each week that we met and just kind of talk about stuff, and people could pitch their books. But there are, if you look on Twitter, there are themed chats, I think, every night, or depending on your time zone, every afternoon. And they're a great way to kind of find folks who maybe don't know who you are. But, you know, if you look for things that you write about, like creatures, and the creature chat is great because it's sort of any type of creature. So it can be anything from like, basically anything that's not human. So you can have aliens, elves, dragons, monsters. So you get a lot of different people coming in to talk about kind of the things that they write about, whether they're writing monsters as horror or monsters as main characters, elves, etc. It's a great little chat, and that's really been kind of the best way. The whole advertising thing on Facebook and Twitter, you have to have a lot of money to throw at that for it to be effective.
Yes.
And I know a lot of newer authors tend to think like, hey, this is the way to do it, because we all see ads all the time. And I even see a few from, oh, I can't remember her last name. Lydia. She writes the Witch Cat books, and she's been at Liberty Con and Jordan Con, and I wish I could remember her last name. Anyway.
Well, I understand about throwing money at the Facebook. I mean, I've spent, you know, a lot of advertising for the virtual HallowCon. You know, our sponsors help pay for advertising through Facebook. I've not seen one return from it yet.
Yeah, and I mean, Facebook does that thing where they offer you free clicks. You know, you get so many dollars. You know, like here's $5 to spend on an ad campaign, and I've done that a couple times, and I sometimes get a few clicks through. I know some of the other folks at Falstaff have gotten a lot better return on their money. It's just kind of, it's not something that I see that really drives sales. No, it's not Ellie Rain. It's
Oh, it's not Ellie Rain. Okay.
Hold on, I could probably look her up. Cat books. She does. Lydia does pretty well because she's actually. Oh yeah, that's not her. That's not her. She has a kiddo. who's tiny. His name's Wesley. She and her husband show up a lot. I know that some of y'all know who she is. That's the only reason why I'm like, I know y'all have met her. Because she technically writes paranormal romance, and it's like a librarian witch and her cat and a dude, and I can't remember. They're kind of mysteries. They're kind of not. But she's a New York Times bestseller, I think. So her ads get a lot of traction because they say New York Times bestseller. But if you're not a New York Times bestseller, that's kind of not really always an effective thing to throw money at Facebook, because the algorithms, they mess with everything. And of course, author pages and all that. I have a friend who does he has a YouTube channel, a very successful YouTube channel, and he had to switch back from having like an official Facebook page for his character to having a personal page because it started smothering his reach when he had an official page. And he kept getting the prompts like, hey, do you want to advertise? You want to advertise? And he was like, no. Which is, by the way, Inner Dojo. Y'all are familiar at all with Master Ken. I went to college with him. He's super funny. His show's great. I think he still does it. Maybe. I don't know. Anyway, but there's like 3 seasons of back episodes if you're interested in checking it out. It's like a karate school meets The Office. So always. It's great. So tropes. And by the way, he's a tropes too. So tropes. So there's good tropes and there's bad tropes. And the good tropes are those things that, help you recognize the genre. Things like the amateur detective, the chosen one, that's a good trope. That one shows up across a lot of genres. And they can be very useful. But there's also tropes that most tropes that exist started, well, I won't say they all started a long time ago, but there are some very consistent tropes that are not so great now because when they started, they were during particular historical time periods. So they get rooted in a particular genre and they continue to show up over and over and over again because we identify them with that particular type of story, but they are racist or sexist or, whatever. Some things, okay, so like some of the newer ones that are just really bad are the dead gays trope. So you see this one a lot. Less so now. There's been a lot of pushback against it, but it was a thing during the 40s that the Hays Code, which was the kind of morality code that Hollywood had to produce material under, said that homosexuality was so bad that if you had homosexual characters, they had to meet a bad end. So you see that a lot still. That I know. I don't watch the show, but I remember the 100. I think there was a plot line that had a lesbian couple and something horrible happened to one of them, and people were really mad about it because it is a thing we kind of expect because that's what we've seen so much. But the reason we expect it is because of censorship. So that's an example of a bad trope. Magical Negro is another one that's problematic, and it doesn't necessarily mean the story is bad if these tropes show up in it, because The Legend of Bagger Vance, which is, a really feel-good movie, is essentially the magical Negro trope. Will Smith's character is there to help the white guy, do his thing. The problem is that when that's kind of the only type of arc that we tend to see for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it gets to be really problematic. So this is why tvtropes.org is a great way to kind of investigate certain things, because you can see sort of what the origins are, how things have played out, and kind of it's been a while since I've been on there, but used to they would kind of like highlight like, hey, this is problematic for these particular reasons. Oh, I see you got a question. Chris says,
question there.
are there tropes that are better for certain genres than others? Well, so there's general tropes like the Chosen One. You see the Chosen One a lot, particularly in science fiction and fantasy. You know, there's like the one dude, and again, slightly problematic. It's usually the dude, but we're starting to get away from that. But I mean, you see it in Winona Earp too. You know, like and they play with that where like, oh, it's the eldest. I'm hoping y'all have seen Winona Earp. It's such a happy place for me. But it's the eldest child in the family who is able to use the gun, and so in season 2, is it season 2 that they discover that the actual oldest sister comes back? Again, spoilers, but that has also been out for a really long time, so I'm sorry. I usually say spoilers before I talk about Star Wars too, because I know there's people who haven't seen even the original Star Wars movies, but also kind of, like there's only so long I can't talk about stuff, and if someone's been out for a few years, I'm probably gonna just like talk about it. So there's kind of general tropes that you see across genres. Genius Kid is kind of a thing. Chosen One. I should have drunk more coffee. Not a trope. Well, I say that it probably is.
Another one is unsuspected hero, like the shy hero.
Yeah, that's Blake, our other producer. But you were talking about the 100 where they killed off that character.
Yes.
There was more reason to killing off that character.
Well, and there may be.
And it wasn't killing. They didn't want to kill off the character.
Yeah. Well, and see,
she's actually working another series. Is why they killed her off.
Well, okay, and see, and that's the thing that happens too, because I think that happened to a certain extent in what's the British soap opera period piece, Downton Abbey. They killed off the one dude, the blonde, partly because he was going to go do crap. My brain's really fried. Legion. He was going to go do Legion, and he had kind of said like, "Hey, I can't do another season," so they killed him off, which was stupidly clumsy. Like as a writer and someone who has a background in screenwriting, I was like, that was not the best way to kill him off. Like he had an existing spinal cord injury, like a recurrence of that, and him like falling down the stairs would have been so much better and in keeping than like random car accident. But that does happen, and the thing is, you can't just avoid doing certain things just because a trope exists that's bad. But you do have to have an awareness of why you're doing.
And Dan Hallfield jumped in here and says it's difficult to escape tropes. It's like we're programmed to respond to them, but I like seeing them turned on their head. I also haven't had enough coffee to give you a good example, though.
Yes. Okay. Well, and see, and that's kind of the thing about tropes is they help you identify your genre. They help your readers know what to expect. And they're kind of shorthand for certain things. So, you know, with a cozy mystery, when you encounter the amateur detective, whether it's Poirot or Miss Marple or Miss Fisher or Father Brown or I can't remember the lady from the Cat Who books, but or excuse me, it's not a lady, it's a guy, isn't it? Wait, yes. Anyway, I can't remember the person from the Cat Who books, but when you encounter that character, you kind of know what to expect. You know that they probably have some sort of well, even Sherlock Holmes is kind of an amateur detective, even though he made a living at it because he wasn't a police officer. And that's sort of where the line starts to get blurry, because then there's also the private investigator trope.
Yes.
But you know what to expect, so they give you a shorthand. You can kind of jump into the middle of something, and you don't have to go into all the backstory about why this person is able to do these things, because your reader is going to be like, oh wait, that's the amateur detective character, so I know I'll find out further down the road. So that's great. Bending tropes is kind of how we get new tropes. And they can, I mean, I really like bending tropes, and that's a good way to take sort of bad tropes and then rework them into something that where you think, I know where this is going. You know, you have the black sidekick, only he's not the sidekick anymore. Suddenly he becomes the hero, or he becomes something else, the villain maybe. And bending them kind of gives you that, and that's where we start to get differentiations too from things like, because we started with cyberpunk, and cyberpunk was well, actually I take that back. Sort of retroactively, Gormenghast is seen as being kind of the initial steampunk novel, even though only really the third book in that trilogy starts to get very steampunk, and that's mostly the car. But steampunk, I guess, sort of preceded cyberpunk. But we have cyberpunk, then steampunk kind of made a bigger emergence, and then from that we start to get dieselpunk, because people are like, oh, this is cool, but maybe we won't have steam engines.
And then you get weird stuff like cassette retrofuturism and things like that as well.
Yeah, well, and
now you're talking Blake's.
You're speaking my speed now, because I love props as tropes as well, like the Doomsday device and the diskette that will either save the world or destroy the world. Things like that are amazing tropes, and at least the literature based around retrofuturisms.
Right, and I watched Cursed a couple weekends ago, and it's interesting because it has the magical weapon that's the king's weapon or whatever, but then they kind of turn that a little. I mean, it's Miller, so you sort of expect that, but it gets bent because the weapon itself is kind of the embodiment of absolute power corrupts absolutely. So that's kind of an example of where you take something where, we have the Lady of the Lake, and I was very confused actually watching the TV production or the Netflix production of Cursed. I'm not familiar with the graphic novels for that one. Although I realized when I got to the end, I was like, oh wait, Frank Miller, that's why all these interstitial cards look like the way they do. And that's also why it's so sort of insanely violent, even though it sort of looks like a CW show and is very teeny bopper at the same time.
Yeah. Carl Witzman has added, he says, I also saw when I read or see the new cop, old cop team where the old guy's only days away from retirement. He goes, geez, he said, maybe it's just more an overused plot device.
So, yeah, and that's a really interesting trope, because if you've ever read Save the Cat, Blake Snyder puts buddy cop movie as the same sort of plot as romance, which is both very accurate, but is a very interesting way to look at the dynamic of the buddy cop movie. But also, if you look at it as this is basically many of the same steps that you would see in a romance. A lot of times with romance, particularly visually, one of the characters is like, I've given up on love, and then they find that one person that makes them rethink everything. So it kind of makes sense that the buddy cop, the new cop, the old cop is always like just about to quit or retire or throw in the towel, whatever it is, and then they find.
I think Snyder called that the buddy love scenarios or something like that.
It could be.
Yeah.
I would say it has been a while since I have.
Yeah, it's either buddy love or what's the other one? I can't think of the. It sometimes falls into do with the problem, things like that, and then the new cop has the rite of passage, so it kind of ebbs and flows through all of his critiques and beat sheets and stuff that he goes through.
Yeah, well, and that's where some folks really don't like Save the Cat, which I can understand. And I've also had people tell me like, "Oh, I'm not writing a screenplay, so why would I read that book?" And I'm like, because novels still mostly have 3-act structure. That's why. I mean, you can have 5-act structure, you can have 7-act structure, but all of that kind of eventually condenses down into beginning, middle, end, and it's always useful to look at sort of other forms of media to kind of get ideas on structure. But some folks really dislike him, but I greatly enjoyed looking at the way he kind of broke things down, because it helps you look at things that you would not immediately put into certain sort of bigger genres, like Sunshine, which is essentially a horror movie. It's not Event Horizon type horror, but it definitely turns into Monster in the House horror, in a different way than in both similar and different ways than, say, Alien turns into Monster in the House horror. But at the start, you're thinking this is definitely science fiction. It's not horror. And then it kind of turns the further you get into it. And there's also, I really love Sunshine. It's a great movie. I mean, it's kind of hard not to love Danny Boyle's work. But it has elements of kind of man against elements, man against himself, man against each other. It's great. It puts all of that in there. Plus that little kind of horror feeling of like people are getting picked off through their own stupidity, through other people's stupidity, through circumstance, with this big epic feel of we're going to save the world, maybe. So, and that's where you kind of get into bending tropes, where you start to meld genres together, and you can't. I tend to not put a genre on anything I write until after I've written it, because I put everything in the blender and just kind of like hit the button until I get a story. So sometimes I have to go back after the fact and say, okay, this is more of a this than this, but you can't do that. And again, there's a certain extent where you don't need to put a genre on something, except that then you have to sell it.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. I go, is it okay to just go genre less? Because sometimes you got to even just dive in and be like, well, this took place in 1946. Crap, does that mean it's diesel punk then? Because it is a fictitious cycle of events, but it could be like alternative history without the war continuing and like all this other stuff. So yeah, you definitely have to sometimes dive deep down into your piece to actually see what it's actually made out of.
Yeah, and some of it depends on kind of the context of how you're trying to pitch or sell something. If you're looking for an agent, then being able to really narrowly define something is good. Same with if you're looking at a bigger publisher. The smaller publishers sometimes are a little more accepting of like, hey, we publish a lot of stuff. I mean, Falstaff is like that because they have kind of a wide range of what they publish. So things that are kind of hit on multiple genres are okay with them. But if you're pitching something to a publisher that primarily publishes mysteries, you want to make sure that what you're telling them is definitely, hey, this is a mystery, and not, oh, well, it's really kind of epic fantasy with, kind of a private eye, but, it's more about romance. Like, that's not going to fly. But when you're sitting at a table at a convention and someone walks up and says, hey, what are your books about? I mean, I have pitched the Southern Gothic, which is, at its bones, it's a Southern Gothic story, but it's Southern Gothic, urban fantasy, police procedural, dark fantasy romance with a crunchy horror center. When you're in person with someone, that's great. When you're trying to put that in a tweet or an advertisement on Facebook, that's not going to fly, because it's way too many words for most people to kind of sort through and get a feel for. Like, oh, okay, yeah, no, I might like that. Because it opens up so many questions about, like, well, what do you mean when you say police procedural, dark fantasy romance? Some things will work better in person, and that's kind of the tricky part about trying to sell stuff, which I'm really horrible at. I know people who are much better at it, or who can get away with certain things that I can't. So knowing your genre, being able to identify your genre, but sometimes have to kind of come back to it after you write the story. Like, it's great to have an idea of like what you want to do beforehand, and if you are someone who plots out in detail ahead of time, then you definitely probably want to know, like, hey, this is the type of story I'm trying to write, even if it doesn't end up being that. So anyway, I feel like I've rambled a lot, and I think I'm close to being out of time. So I don't know if anybody has any other questions. I have actually talked about everything on my list to talk about. I just don't know if I've done so in a very cohesive fashion. So
so far, it's been excellent.
Well,
one last question for you then. Can you make something too trope heavy? Like it so it just becomes like slapstick almost?
Yes. That can kind of be a genre in itself, I think. But you do have to kind of wink and nod to that.
So basically like a self-aware satire almost?
Yeah. I mean, and that's like,
because I love tropes. I love the idea of having the giant, the giant bodyguard for the man with the machine gun kind of deal, and cassette tape that's gonna turn everyone into zombies. And once those zombies, are all over the world, they're gonna do the biddings for the henchmen. But the thing is, they're all zombies, so you kind of win the world kind of deal. So I just think it's hilarious all at the same time.
Yeah, well, and that's I'm trying to think. Of course, so much stuff has come out about both of these creative personalities, but kind of a good example of sort of hanging a lantern on almost the overuse of tropes is Next Wave, Agents of Hate, which is a comic series. I think there were 6 of them or 8 of them. I had a collected volume of them. And they basically, let's say Cameron Stewart and what's his name, Ellis. They took sort of lesser known Marvel, I think it was Marvel heroes, and kind of threw them into this weird, almost alternate universe. There's a lot of it that's super tropey, but they did it in such a ridiculous way that like you don't care that it's sort of over the top. The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen does that a little bit. Moore can be kind of problematic with the way he attacks material, but like he tends to kind of just lean really hard into the tropes.
Yeah, it was a good diesel-filled trope adventure there.
A lot of comic book artists actually and authors do that too, because I was going to say Miller does that to a certain extent as well, particularly with the Sin City stuff, because it's like it's so extreme. Like when you go through it, like you see the tropes, but they're like turned up to 11. But he creates a world in which it can all exist. So it's possible to do that. But I think you kind of have to either completely not care, so you're just kind of doing your thing, or you have to be aware of it enough to like really kind of push into it. So, any other questions?
Actually, Dan Hollifield threw out a comment. You may know Dan from LibertyCon.
I do.
Yeah, he says you have been excellent, Anna.
Oh, well, I appreciate that.
And yeah, like you said, we finally get you to HallowCon. The only problem is nobody can actually get here to meet you.
I know. Well, one of these years, it's gonna happen where everybody can be there in person, and we won't be having to,
socially do. Hey, I'm sort of an introvert. I've been practicing for this all my life.
Yes, and there are lots of things about the not having people crowd up on me at the grocery store that I have definitely enjoyed, but it has been kind of frustrating to not be able to get together with people in person, and cons in particular I have missed. So
yeah, I have. And you know what I really miss the most? The one thing I miss the most about the cons? Hugs.
Yeah. Yes.
I miss the hugs.
Yes.
Skunk Rocker comes in with one last minute question. I missed most of the chat because I had to render a video. Did you name your favorite and least favorite tropes while you were in here?
I mean, I talked about some common ones. I'd probably so least favorite would probably indeed be the dead gaze, or one that just really made me want to throw my tablet at the wall. I love Stranger Things, but Billy, oh my God, like that's an extension of kind of the dead gaze trope, is the like, oh, he was an abused kid and he becomes an abuser, which is an actual thing, and there's a lot of reasons for that, but then they kill him off. Oh my God, instead of like his redemptive act is to die. I hate that so much, even though it was a great scene, and such emotional impact, but really, can we just like lean away from that a little more? And I don't know, favorite tropes. Well, I mean, I did say I really like mysteries and kind of the amateur detective, which again, that's one reason why I don't write mysteries very well, is kind of the author's ability to take something that seems really disconnected from solving crimes, I guess, and then incorporate it into someone who's like really good at it. Like Father Brown kind of makes sense because he hears confession a lot, so he's probably heard everything. But like Miss Marple, being able to just like, oh, well, I remember about this argument that these two ladies had at the fish market, and then she is able to solve a murder because she has this just like innate knowledge of the human dynamic. That's probably one of my favorite things to read. Is that thing. Oh, somebody's messaging me. Sorry. So anyway.
All right. Of course, Skunk Rocker also threw in. He says he was going to do Billy as a costume at HallowCon this year, but yeah, then this happened.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, and you'd probably be. I've seen you on Joe's Stupid O'Clock show, so you probably would have done quite well with that costume.
Oh, so you've tuned into our weekly show?
I see it sometimes. I don't know that I've ever listened to more than just a couple minutes of it, but it pops up a lot on my Facebook feed. Maybe because I am friends with you and Dan, so it tends to
magnify the.
I see it almost every week. Not every week, but usually if I'm online, when y'all are online, it'll pop up through my
like, hey, something to do. Yeah.
Yep.
All right. I was just sort of waiting on our next guest to show up, but she hadn't made it yet. But we're going to go ahead and close out because we had our,
Yes.
like I said, we paid for, Facebook advertising and our sponsors helped cover that. So we got to thank them by showing their commercials.
Great.
So thank you again. And hopefully
you.
we will see you next year, either at Liberty or HallowCon.
Yes. Excellent. Y'all have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. And there she is. All right, Lynn, we're about to go into commercials, and then we'll bring you up just at the end of the commercial break.
Hey guys, it's Angel with Immortal Impressions doing the virtual thing for HallowCon2020. Y'all can visit us at For Immortal Impressions on Facebook. Send us a private message. We can handle all of your ceramic, sewing, 3D printing, masks, costumes, and all the other goodies that we have, and we'll be glad to take care of you. Y'all have a good con and a good year.